Well, I guess you're going to say Bud Crawford is ducking again. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win or you find a way to lose. There's been a lot of talk about Terrence Crawford. You know, people are picking sides between Crawford and Spence. And I actually sat on a chat last night. I decided to get a little bit more involved with some of these other boxing platforms. So I decided to join the live of the boxing platform, Blue Blood Sports TV, because I came across a video, one of the other boxing content creators, where he was saying negative stuff about Blue, and I said, you know what, I found it a little surprising that when it comes to creating content on YouTube, that people would actually more or less it seemed being counterproductive than working together. And like I always say, we build champions, we don't break them down. So I felt in what I was watching with the other boxing channel, like the person, his video was entertaining, but I just felt like it was almost like tearing down the Blue Blood Sports TV's boxing channel. Now, the other boxing channel I'm talking about is Manager Marty, right? And I said, obviously, both of these guys know, they know what they're talking about. They have, Blue Blood has a huge following. Marty, his following is growing. But when I was listening, I said, let me jump in and see what's going on. So I jumped in on the live with Blue Blood, and there was a lot of good discussion. But one thing I gathered, doesn't matter whether it's with most of these channels, the fans, I'm not talking about the content creators, but the fans themselves, they almost want you to pick a side. And it's funny because one of the individuals on there was asking me, because he wasn't sure how many pay-per-views Crawford sold. And I told him, my understanding is 120,000 based on, what I was able to find out there on the internet. Now, again, I'll tell you, just like I tell anyone, only BLK Prime, the individuals who are behind the pay-per-view, arrangements, and the fly on the wall knows exactly how many pay-per-view sales the Crawford Evanescence event did. But my understanding is globally it did 120,000. Now, don't sit there and shoot the messenger. It's just what I came across, and I haven't found anything to say it's not true. So at the end of the day, I'm going to go ahead and just throw that out there as a piece of information, and you can decide what to do with it. But while talking, I noticed, like during the discussion last night, that for the most part, people keep talking about Spence and Crawford and why they're not fighting. And there's a lot of finger pointing going on towards Crawford, some of finger pointing towards Earl Spence. And I was asked which side I was on. And I said, look, I'm on boxing side. If you've been following this channel, I'm not biased. I just try to give an honest opinion, an educated opinion, and I try to come with as much factual stuff as possible. But a lot of times you can't help but be opinionated when you're talking about boxing. I mean, if all of us were sitting here on a live chat, we'd all have opinions, and we're entitled to our own opinions. But what I want to give you right now is not my opinion. What I'm going to give you are a couple of facts. And these facts you can take into your next discussion on Earl Spence and Terrence Crawford as far as why they're not going to fight, because this is what's really going on, okay? And I'm just going to be 100% real with you. Look, Earl Spence is out. You guys know that. He doesn't want to return until April or June. Terrence Crawford just fought, doesn't want to return between April and June, okay? So what do we have going on in the interim? Well, in the interim, you got Stanionis. Let me show you something, right? Let me come down here and pull it up real quick, okay? So in the interim, I'm going to scroll up and let's see something here, all right? You got Stanionis. Let me bring this over a little bit for you. Okay. You got the number 6 about to fight the number 5. Okay. That's for the WBA regular title. Then you're going to have Boots Ennis fighting somebody from Ukraine. Name is Karen, right? Now, these are the big names that we're all talking about as the guys who are going to be handed the torch, who's going to step into the shoes of Errol Spence, Terence Crawford, and continue to carry the welterweight division. Now, I'm going to point something out to you because I think it's time we stop talking about Spence and Crawford. The finger pointing needs to stop. It doesn't matter if it's you feel Crawford's ducking or if you feel like he did the right thing taking that quick $10 million. It doesn't matter if you feel like Errol Spence is just making excuses and alibiing to not fight Crawford or to not fight any real, true competition, and that Errol Spence has become he's contradicting himself and becoming a hypocrite because Errol Spence is holding up the belts in the welterweight division the same way he accused Keith Thurman of holding up the belts. You guys remember that? Errol Spence was like, hey, he's holding up the belts. Give me my shot. Keith Thurman, some can say he didn't want to fight Errol Spence, but, you know, when you're an up-and-comer in boxing, there's kind of like a probationary period. It doesn't matter how much you think you're ready to fight for a title. You got to put your work in, okay? And so Errol Spence was kind of in a position like where Boots is in right now. But Boots, out of all of them, is more than deserving of a title shot, but that's a whole nother story. But kind of in that position, like, hey, I need my shot. I need my shot. So Spence felt that Thurman wasn't really giving him an opportunity. He vowed he would never fight him, okay? So it is what it is. So when it comes to Spence and Crawford, let's just forget about them for now. They're not going to fight. I'm telling you that right now, okay? And that is my opinion. But after I explain why I feel that way, I think maybe you'll understand where I'm coming from. So I'm going to give you a peek behind my tent flaps so you can see what I'm thinking and why. So we just pointed out that for the WBA, you got Stanionis and Ortiz. They're going to be fighting, okay? The winner of that more than likely will go on and fight whoever's holding a WBA title. Now, Ennis and this guy named Karen, okay? This is something that I want to point out to y'all, right? You got Ennis. Where I got it right here. You got Ennis and this guy named Karen Chikadzian, right? I may be mispronouncing that. Okay, they're going to be in a 12-round co-feature bout on the undercard of Gervonta Tank Davis and Hector Luis Garcia. Going to be taking place on January 7th. Now, what I want you guys to understand, Boots Ennis and the number 4 IBF ranked Chikadzian, they're battling for the interim IBF 147-pound title, which will put the winner in a position to challenge the current welterweight champion, Errol the Truth Spence, for the strap. Now pay attention to that, okay? So Boots Ennis is battling to become the interim IBF 147-pound titleist, right? So let's go back here. Let me scroll up here and show you what I'm talking about, okay? Let me see, where do I have it? Boxing rankings, right here. So Boots Ennis is battling, so let's scroll down, and you're going to see what I'm getting at. When you look at this right here, you see Jerome Boots Ennis for the IBF. Hold on a second. Let me scoot this over a little bit for you so you can see what's going on here. All right, before I was saying Boots Ennis, after Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis fight, they're fighting for the WBA regular title, right? To me, Virgil Ortiz would slide over there for the WBA. Him and Stanionis get it on, and Boots Ennis will bubble up from the number 2 to the number 1 position under the WBO. And if he just held tight, he would more than likely become the mandatory for Terence Crawford, and we would be seeing Terence Crawford fight Boots Ennis in his next fight. But this is the problem. Now, if you didn't understand what I just said, I'm going to say it again. The number 2, Jerome Boots Ennis, because Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis, let me slide this across for you. You see, because Virgil Ortiz, underneath the WBA, the number one, fighting Stanionis for the regular WBA regular world welterweight title, because they're fighting here for the WBA, where Virgil Ortiz is the number one under the WBO right now, he's going to drop off because he's chosen to go out there and fight for the WBA and become mandatory for the WBA. If he can beat Stanionis, which is that's not an easy fight. As a result, Virgil Ortiz will come off of his number one position, and Boots Ennis would have gone into that number one. That's how it should work. And then Boots Ennis, if he held tight, because he should get past his opponent in January, he would have became the mandatory to Terrence Crawford. And then we'd all be happy, because now we see Terrence Crawford fighting someone who people feel is a real threat. And then for the others, we get to see Boots Ennis to see if he not only passes the eye test, but if he's the real deal. Because fighting Terrence Crawford, he's going to get hit. And I keep saying, we don't know if Boots Ennis is the real deal. He passes the eye test, looks good on paper, but what happens when he gets hit? What happens when he gets hurt? I've done a video on this. All the greats have gotten hurt. And what they do, they either get up or they regroup and come back, and more than likely they stop their opponent. Now, Boots Ennis hasn't shown that he can do this because he hasn't been hurt. He's dominated his opponents. So it's either he's that good or it's the competition. Now, we would have got a chance to find that out if he had planned on staying here underneath the WBO and, waiting to see if he'd get that shot at Crawford. But this is what's happening. Remember, I just told you, Boots Ennis is fighting Karen Chugazan, right? I know I'm messing up that name, so my bad. But look, underneath the IBF. So because Boots Ennis is choosing to fight for that interim title underneath the IBF, Boots Ennis, his position as a number two, which would be the number one in the WBO, he falls off. Do you understand? Boots Ennis, because he accepted to fight the number four, Karen Chugazyan, right? Because he chose to fight him for the interim title for the IBF, he falls off where he was in the WBO. And that if he wins that fight, then Boots Ennis becomes a mandatory to Earl Spence. So this is the problem you're going to have. Boots Ennis, let me slide this over for y'all. Boots Ennis will be the mandatory to Earl Spence in the IBF. Then Virgil Ortiz or Stanionis is going to be the mandatory to Earl Spence for the WBA. And let me tell you, because Stanionis already took step aside, he's been put into this fight with Ortiz. Stanionis, let me tell you, if he beats Ortiz, he's not going to sit here and want to take step aside for Spence to fight Crawford. He's going to want to fight Spence, and he's going to get that fight. And Stanionis isn't going to be like, look, I beat Ortiz, now you want me to fight Ennis? He's not doing that. So what's going to happen is Stanionis should be the first one for the right of refusal to take that shot at Spence. And then Boots Ennis goes into a holding pattern because he's going to be waiting to get his shot at Earl Spence after Earl Spence fights Stanionis. Now, what makes all this interesting is you got Keith Thurman out here who the WBC has mandated fights Earl Spence. So what they've done is horrible because Earl Spence, he has all those belts, but now the real killers in the welterweight division outside of Spence and Crawford, Earl Spence has to deal with them. You got to fight Thurman. And remember, I believe, I don't want to call the wrong name, but there was a petition on Earl Spence's behalf for him to fight Keith Thurman. That's not my opinion. So I can't see those key decision makers who petitioned for Spence to fight Keith Thurman to come now and say, nah, we don't really want that fight. So what I see happening for Spence is he's not fighting Crawford next. Spence is going to have to get through Thurman. And if for some reason Thurman doesn't want to take that fight, then Spence is going to have to fight Stanionis. And what could happen is it could force Jerome Boots Ennis and Keith Thurman to fight. That's how I see it. If not, then what you're going to have is Spence fighting Thurman. And if Thurman doesn't want to be Spence and Stanionis, then and Ennis waiting to get a shot at the winner of Spence and Stanionis. So then let's get to my point about Alexis Rocha and Terrence Crawford. So let's go down now. So Terrence Crawford looks like he's in the clear because he's not going to be fighting Earl Spence or Ennis, Thurman, or Ortiz. Because what could happen is Thurman may decide that he wants to fight Crawford. Because look at what could happen here. Virgil Ortiz, we just talked about. He's fighting over there for the WBA regular title with Stanionis. So Virgil Ortiz is off of the WBO. Jerome Boots Ennis is fighting for the mandatory position in the IBF. So Jerome Boots Ennis, he's off of the WBO listing. He's not there anymore. Forget about it. But look who's still there. Keith one-time Thurman. How about that? We could see Keith Thurman getting in there with Terrence Crawford. Now, would Keith Thurman do that? He didn't want to fight Crawford before. He wanted all this money. And he has every right to ask for that kind of money. Will he get it? I don't know. The way BLK Prime is going, I think the verdict's still out on that. But obviously there's some money there. Because Adrian Broner, he keeps doing interviews. And I don't care what anyone says. Adrian Broner's not going to lie. Adrian Broner has an extremely lucrative contract for 3 fights. And if they got that kind of money to put up for a high-risk guy like Adrian Broner, even though Broner's a draw, people still like him. He has the name. He's got the personality. And he can fight, okay? But at the end of the day, if they can put that kind of money up for 3 fights for what's his name, Broner, 8-figure deal, why can't they give Keith Thurman, let's say, I don't know, 6 to 8 million to come and fight Terrence Crawford? Keith Thurman is a way bigger name than most of these guys. Keith Thurman is a ex-unified champion. Keith Thurman has never been knocked out. He got knocked down by Pacquiao, but some people say Keith Thurman won that fight. His inactivity hurt him. Now we get it. The consensus is, if we're still talking about the Keith Thurman before getting married and all that, and the elbow injuries, whatever, right? I'm telling you, I picked Keith Thurman to beat everybody. That's how special that dude was. But so many years of inactivity, kind of hard to go against Crawford and Spence when it comes to them fighting a guy like Thurman. But I still give Thurman a good chance to upset the apple cart. And I'm just being real. But back to what I was saying. The number 1 under the WBO, Ortiz, he's out of there. He's in the WBA now. Jerome Boots Ennis, number 2 under the WBO, he's out of there. He's over there on the IBF now. The number 3, Keith Thurman, if for some reason he can't fight, he's out of there. Now we're down to Conor Benn. He's out of there already. With all the drama going on with him, he's not holding that position. There's nothing Eddie Hearn can do, Matchroom can do. There's nothing anyone can do to help Conor Benn. Conor Benn is out of there. And once they update this list, I'm sure he's going to fall off. So then who's next? Alexis Rocha. Alexis Rocha. And then after him, let's say they don't want to fight Alexis Rocha. Then you got David Evanescence. Now look, Crawford has been labeled as a duck, right? Everyone says Crawford's a duck. Crawford doesn't want to fight anybody. His resume sucks. I'm not saying that. That's what a lot of boxing fans say. But one thing we can't say is Crawford has never ducked his mandatories. He gets hit with mandatories, he has to fight him, man. Nobody who wants to pay a step-aside fee. You know what I'm saying? And when he does get a voluntary defense, then, you know, it kind of is what it is. But after the Evanescence, he got Crowley. I mean, Crowley's making some noise, but who the hell wants to see Crowley and Crawford fight? I didn't know. I've seen him fight before, but it's not until I saw his face on the interview I was watching today. I was like, okay, that's the guy. Because I was like, who the hell is Cody Crowley? Canadian, he can fight, but he don't need to mess with Crawford. Then he got a guy named Giovanni Santillan. And then the fight I want to see is Blair Cobb. So realistically, right, I did a video on this. But I'm telling you right now, Alexis Rocha or Blair Cobb. And it'll probably be Alexis Rocha because Alexis Rocha dismantled Blair Cobb. Now, if you haven't been following what I've been saying, my apologies because I tried to not jump around and make it as straightforward as possible. But for those who say Bud is a duck, this isn't going to help his position. And it is not Terrence Crawford's fault because Virgil Ortiz and Boots Ennis, I don't know who is orchestrating these fights, but it almost looks, because, you know, we talk about conspiracy theories, right? And the old Kinahan, right? That name came up again. Now, this is all bull crap, okay? But, because I definitely don't buy into this, but you keep hearing people talk about Crawford ducking, Spence ducking. Crawford don't want to fight, Spence want to fight. But every now and then you get the guy, the damn Irish mob conversation comes up and says Kinahan is behind arranging Boots Ennis to come over and fight this guy, Karen Chukadzian. And the Irish mob is behind Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis fighting for the WBA. Because that frees up Terrence Crawford to not have to fight any real killers. So Terrence Crawford can come and cherry pick a guy like Alexis Rocha or Blair Cobb. And what I say to that is, don't take it to the stupid. I personally think Boots Ennis is sitting back and maybe their teams, maybe they jumped the gun on some of the things they were pushing for. Because the way I see it, Terrence Crawford, why would Ortiz and Boots Ennis both be pursuing some interim titles when they both are going to end up becoming mandatories to Earl Spence? And then one of them may have to wait. Because if Stanionis wins, more than likely, first you got Keith Thurman there. And then if he doesn't want it, then you got Stanionis. And if he decides something happened, then you looking at Boots Ennis, okay? So, all in all, I just think it's a cluster. But it's good because we're getting some fights. But I think Boots Ennis should have stayed where he was in that number 2 position for the WBO. And fought somebody, maybe, if not Thurman, bang with Alexis Rocha. And then bubble up once Virgil Ortiz pulls out to that number 1 and be the mandatory be made the mandatory for Terrence Crawford. But I don't know. Boxing politics, these guys, knee-jerk decisions. I think, at some point, if you're thirsty, man. And when you get an opportunity to drink, you're going to go drink. And I think that's kind of what happened here as far as Boots Ennis, man. I know he wants a shot. They talk about the IBF. They talk about the WBC. They say they'll fight Terrence Crawford or Spence. So hopefully they can come back and I don't know what can happen, but once he gets locked in to becoming the interim welterweight champion for the IBF, it's over for the WBO. It's over for him in the WBC. It's over for him in the damn WBA. So Alexis Rocha, for those of you who don't know who he is, y'all need to understand who this guy is, man. He's 5'10", 70-inch reach. Crawford, I believe, is 5'8" with a 74-inch reach. Rocha has almost a 60% KO ratio. He can fight. If you don't know who he is, he fights like Juan Manuel Marquez. Very similar style. When he was fighting Blair Cobb, I was saying to myself, damn. I did a video on it. You can go look it up on my channel. I was telling you, this man fights like Juan Manuel Marquez. If you don't know who that is, you've been living underneath a rock. That's who fought Pacquiao 4 times. So Rocha can fight, man. Now, will he beat Crawford? I don't know. But what I will tell you is Alexis Rocha can fight. But Crawford should get through that. And then, so let's take a look at this, right? If Crawford gets through Rocha, because that's what I think is going to happen, and Spence is busy with all his guys over there. Maybe after Spence gets through his first mandatory, then he can take a voluntary defense. And then Spence can go and bang with Crawford. So I think Spence has to make he has to fight his mandatory, whoever that's going to be next. And then he'll be able to make a voluntary defense. And that's where he and Crawford can get it on if they can come to terms. But if not, and Keith Thurman and Earl Spence are going to be busy. Because these sanctioning bodies, they want their belts defended. They want it defended, man. And you could have mandatory, because he has so many belts, he could have his WBA mandatory, then go right into his, first he has his WBC mandatory, then go right into his WBA mandatory, then go right into his IBF mandatory. That could be Earl Spence. That could be his situation. Where Terrence Crawford is just over here. He get his mandatory out the way, voluntary defense. And when you look at his mandatory becoming guys like Rocha or Blair Cobb, people are going to say that he's ducking. He's ducking Spence, and it's not Crawford's fault. You know what I'm saying? But if he gets an opportunity to fight like what he had with Earl Spence here the last couple of months, and he chose not to take that fight, I understand why he didn't. Half a fight for $10 million or however much money he made, I get it. But I don't necessarily agree. But I understand. I don't have to agree with you, but if I can understand, then we're good. But the way things are going, I think Crawford and Spence are on divergent paths, and I don't think they're going to fight at all. So I'm going to leave y'all with that. That's 25 minutes of talk. Hopefully you guys understand the points I'm trying to make, and the stuff I'm sharing with y'all is a lot of factual stuff, man. This isn't me just saying this is kind of this is just something I'm pulling out my backside. What I'm giving you is factual stuff. This is what's going to happen. Ortiz is out of there for the WBO. Jerome Boots Ennis, he's out of there for the WBO. You got Keith Thurman. Now, if he chooses to fight Earl Spence, well, then Conor Ben, we know he's not going to get the fight. The next one's Alexis Rocha. Like, that's not my opinion. That's not me with the hood champion crystal ball. That's really how it is. But that being said, as always, appreciate your support. If you don't know who Alexis Rocha is, check him out, man. 21 wins, 13 KOs, 1 loss. Look him up, understand what he's about, and understand, people, that Terrence Crawford is going to have to fight this guy. And don't get mad at Crawford and call him a duck and disrespect the man. This is just one of those situations that really don't help Terrence Crawford's image. And if it's on BLK Prime, that definitely isn't going to help, because there's so many people who still speak so negatively of BLK Prime. And I'm going to tell you this. Why not take a look at what BLK Prime is doing? The fact they're putting good money in these guys' pockets. And at least let's give it. I tell you what. When I was in the military, we would do, before we made a change or we formed a strong opinion on something, we'd wait till we had enough data to do an analysis. So I'd say, let's just, as a planning factor, set for 3 months or 3 fights underneath the BLK platform. So Terrence Crawford was the first fight, the second fight would be Broner, and then whoever the third fight is, right? That'll give us 3 fights under the BLK banner. By that third fight, when the dust settles, we should be able to do an analysis to see how pay-per-view sales were, to see how the marketing and promotion was, to see just if fighters were actually paid on time, or if fighters were still waiting, 8, 9, 10 days after the fight to get paid. You see, by the first fight, whatever, we'll say we'll give you a pass. You're figuring things out. The second fight, you should kind of be halfway there. By the third fight, everything should be ironed out. And then at that point, as far as our planning factor, we should be able to come and say, all right, we're either going to say BLK Prime is a good platform and they have their stuff together, or we're going to say, nah, they're not. They shouldn't be in boxing. They're bad for boxing. But right now, it's unfair to say that, because we don't have enough data to really perform an analysis on their performance. So we don't have the metrics. Can't go off of one event and just say everything about BLK Prime is bad. We need enough data. We need the metrics so we can do an analysis. And then from there, we can make I think, a clear decision of whether BLK Prime is good for boxing or bad for boxing. That being said, y'all keep cool. Subscribe to the channel, man. Hit that like button. And don't forget to donate. It helps me a lot. I appreciate it. Y'all keep cool. Shout out to the veterans, all 7 continents, in the breeze.